The Cherry Stem Killer, Chapter 1, by the Prowler. I find myself standing here lighting my cigarette, once again hovering over another dead body. Another night, another death, I sarcastically said to the coroner as he looked over the victim's remains. Now, while this isn't unusual for my kind of work, me being a homicide detective after all, the thing that sticks out about these last few murders is there was a tied cherry stem found next to the bodies. Tied as if someone performed that parlor trick when you put the maraschino cherry stem in your mouth and tie it with your tongue. The similarities end there, though, because the manner of death is different in each case. This killer has variety. I truly was hoping not to see another body show up with a cherry stem, because that would mean we have a serial killer on our hands, and that's not something I'm looking forward to. I don't want the spotlight. I'm not looking for fame, and I don't want my name in the paper. But here we are. Plus, with Halloween approaching, the press is already having a field day with this. They're already beginning to call whoever's perpetrating these crimes the Cherry Stem Killer. There'd been 4 murders to this point, with tonight's marking the 5th. And let me tell you, this might be the most gruesome yet. The victim, a Mr. Joseph Lyles, age 54, was gagged and tied to the 4 corners of his bed. He was definitely not alone. The only question is, was he murdered by whoever he was having his kinky night of fun with? Or was he left tied and finished up by someone who came across him in his vulnerable state? With the takeout bags of food from a nearby restaurant found on the dining room table, early reports are already coming back to me that the victim was last seen leaving the restaurant with a much younger woman at approximately 8:30 p.m. Details of said female are as of now medium build, short in height, brunette hair, and estimated age of late 20s to mid-30s. Mr. Lyles was not married, so that rules out his wife. Further investigating of his personal effects will shed light if he was dating anyone currently. If not, then this could have been a chance encounter, an encounter that went horribly wrong. Any initial thoughts, Doc? I asked curiously to Dr. Sheila Andrews, the county's medical examiner, who was presently hovering over the victim's large, gaping throat wound. "What's that, Detective?" she asked irritatingly. I said, any initial thoughts on the cause of death? Was it from the slash to the throat? I asked again as I pointed to the wound. Well, it didn't help matters, but it's too early to say if this is what did him in. I'll know more once I get him up on the slab, she said sarcastically. All right, well, keep me informed once you find something definitive, I told her as I exited the room. Bodies being bagged and tagged, the team's going through the victim's personal effects. I better head on over to the restaurant to check the surveillance footage, see if I can get a good look at this woman who left with Mr. Lyles. As I made my way to the restaurant, I received a call from my wife, wishing me a good morning, and put my son Finn on the phone to say hello. I then informed her I was probably going to be late tonight and not to wait up for me. I could hear the frustration in her voice, as this was going to be another night I was going to be coming home late. But what could I do? I told her there was another victim found with a cherry stem next to their body, and it looked like we had a serial killer on our hands. She informed me she already knew. Before I could ask her how, in my state of confusion, she told me I made the front page of the paper. Detective Mark Riley, picked to lead cherry stem murders. the headline read, alongside a picture of me, which my wife said I looked very handsome in. She was concerned, though. That was the frustration I heard in her voice. Not about me doing my job, but the publicity that this case would bring to me and our family. I agreed, but there was nothing I could do. I told her I loved her as I pulled up to the restaurant and told her I'd speak to her later. I got out of my car and went inside, where other officers were waiting. I sat down and went through the footage. Mr. Lyles and his mystery woman arrived at the restaurant together, so he didn't meet her there. They already knew each other. They sat and had a couple of drinks, then ordered their food. In total, they were inside the restaurant for an hour, and in fact did leave at 8:30. The description of the woman was pretty damn accurate from what I could tell, but the only problem was I couldn't tell much. She wore a fur around her neck to help hide her face and sunglasses to help hide her eyes. She moved around the restaurant as if she knew where the cameras were, never completely letting it see her face. She knew exactly what she was doing. I sat there trying to get a proper angle or come up with something, but got nothing. Just then my phone rang. It was Dr. Andrews telling me she had something for me, something strange. I told her I was on my way. I then jumped in my car and headed to the medical examiner's office. On my way, something was gnawing at me, though. Something about the woman, the way she moved, the way she carried herself. It just seemed oddly familiar. I don't know. My mind then went back to what Dr. Andrews said. Something strange. What the hell could that mean? What could she have found? How much stranger could this case get? The Cherry Stem Killer, Chapter 2. As I pulled up to the coroner's office, it began to rain. A shot of uncertainty coursed through my gut. What the hell was I about to walk into here? What strange thing could Dr. Andrews have found? I made my way inside and into the city morgue, where Dr. Andrews was standing over the victim's body on the autopsy table. "Good. I'm glad you're here," she said urgently. "What is it you found, Doctor? How strange could it be?" I asked inquisitively. She wasted no time in her response. "His testicles." "What about his testicles?" I asked shockingly. "They were removed and replaced with 2 metal ball bearings, covered tightly in an old piece of cloth, and on the cloth is writing in some language I've never seen before," she said in a shocked, almost frightened tone. She handed me a metal tray that contained the cloth-covered balls. Every inch was covered in a text I've never seen before, along with strange symbols drawn in the spaces between words. It almost looked cult-like. I put the tray down, and the first thing I did was ask for an expert in ancient dialect to be brought down to the medical examiner's office. There's no doubt this case just became strange. As I waited for the dialect expert to arrive, a Dr. Frank L. Bean, I received a call from the fellas searching the victim's dwelling. They reported that they found the victim's appointment book, and in it was the name Julia, written down on several days, including last night. Our first major clue. I'm not getting too excited just yet, though. We don't have a last name, and it might not even be the woman's real name, but it's a start. I told them to keep up the search, and after I got off the phone, Dr. Bean arrived. I had no time to waste and placed the tray in front of him. "Have you seen anything like this before, Doctor? Any idea what language this is?" I asked urgently. He asked for a glove and picked up the ball, closely inspecting the text. He then reached into the bag that was slung around his shoulder and pulled out an old, oversized book, placing it on the table. "I think I know what this is, Detective. I just have to double check," he said as he moved his finger along the pages, looking for the right dialect. "Aha! I found it. It's an ancient Latin dialect spoken in the lower regions of Italy. I've seen these symbols and writing before, by an ancient cult called El Culto del Resuscitore, meaning the cult of the resurrector." "What the hell?" I thought. The doctor continued. "They killed their victims and took one piece of their body, replacing it with a cloth-wrapped replacement, complete with the symbols and writings, until they had a collection of parts that would total one entire body, all with the hopes of summoning a demon with the collected parts," he said in an ominous tone. I stood there stunned. Now I'm dealing with some cult shit, I thought. When I received a call from Dr. Andrews earlier, saying she found something strange, I had no idea it would lead to this. We're beyond strange at this point. This is downright spooky. The Cherry Stem Killer, Chapter 3. I spent hours at the medical examiner's office, going over every detail of the victim with Dr. Andrews. His testicles were removed post-death, and speaking of that, the cause was the obvious large slash wound across his throat. I believe the victim was put to ease with a promise of a night of pleasure, and allowed his guard to come down, and allowed himself to be tied up. There was no drugs present at the scene, or found in his body. This was purely sexual. Unfortunately for him, he trusted the wrong woman. After hours toiling at the coroner's office, I was finally spent. I had enough of the smells, enough of the sights of flesh, and the fluorescent lights were giving me a pounding headache. It was time for me to go home. I needed some semblance of sleep for the days and weeks ahead, however long it takes to catch this woman. I grabbed the folder from Dr. Andrews to look in finer detail later on of the victim and his demise, and left for home. I arrived home shortly after and ate the meal my wife left for me warming in the oven. Meatloaf, my favorite, accompanied with mashed potatoes, a squirt of some Heinz 57 on those taters, and I was all set. Something I never even thought about doing until my wife introduced me to the concept. But ketchup on the mashed potatoes really is quite delicious. As I sat at the table, my wife walked in and kissed my forehead. "Does it taste good, my love?" she asked. I nodded my head in approval and said, "Yes, baby, very much so." She smiled and gave me a kiss. I asked her how her day was, and she said it was fine. Cleaned the house and took care of the kids. She then looked at me with a smile and said she had exciting news to tell me. And even though I was exhausted, I pushed it aside and was full attention to what she had to say. I knew this case was going to take up most of my time, so I wanted to spend as much time with her as I could. I sat waiting for her news, and she proceeded to say, "Guess who I just found out I'm related to now?" she said with such excitement. I tried to contain my annoyance, but I was rolling my eyes on the inside. You see, my wife's big into Ancestry.com and similar sites like it. Her DNA's been matched with famous people and royalty alike. Lots of royalty, actually, and while it is very cool, I hear about a new ancestral relation almost every day, and after a rough day, I wasn't thrilled about hearing of her latest ancestor, but I smiled and said, "Who's the latest person you're related to now, my love?" She smiled and said, "More royalty, another from England, a Lord Neville Burlington, the 8th Earl of Burlington. Not just one of the most noblest of families in all of England. Their bloodline is descended from kings." I sat there and nodded my head. "That's great, dear," I said lovingly. But in my head, I was thinking it's just another royal she's related to, like the countless others she's mentioned. From England to France, Spain, and Germany, they're all just a bunch of cousin humpers. I went back to finishing my meal so I could go to bed, when that name began to annoy me. Neville Burlington. Why do I know that name, my love? I know it wasn't just remembering from school, I said inquisitively. Well, he and his wife were just in the news. Their belongings were recently found in the attic of their ancestral manor, and it was revealed he was the famous serial killer, the Prowler, and his wife helped in the killings of a few of his final victims. They're both my 5th great-grandparents. Isn't that exciting? Oh, and it also was revealed that Neville's brother was Jack the Ripper, and he killed him before he retired. Isn't all of this interesting? She said excitedly. Maybe a little too excited if you ask me. She sat there smiling, staring at her phone as she read up on her new killer ancestors. I bent down and kissed her goodnight. I was tired. Dog-tired. Before I headed upstairs, she informed me she had to leave to take care of her mother who was sick, and she needed to take her some medicine and soup. So I had to keep an ear out for the kids. I told her, of course, but she would have to be quick about things because I was on call 24/7 with this new killer on the loose especially. She kissed me, and I went to bed. The clock said 9:30 as I closed my eyes. About 3 hours later, I felt my wife crawl into bed, and she kissed my cheek before I fell back to sleep. About 2 hours later, I was woken once again, except this time it was by my phone. Shit. I knew this would happen. God forbid I get any rest around here. I answered it angrily. It was Charles, the second detective working on the case. As he gave me an update I didn't want. There was another victim. The cherry stem killer has struck again. The Cherry Stem Killer, Chapter 4. I told Charles I would be there as quick as I could, then hung up. I laid there dreading having to get up out of this bed, and just stared up at the ceiling, trying to rub the slumber from my eyes. I pulled the covers aside and swung my legs over the side of the bed, my feet jumping as they touched the cold floor. It was especially chilly this morning. Oh, how I missed the old carpet under my feet. Then maybe they wouldn't be so cold. But the wife wanted tile floors, and how could I argue that? I finally got out of bed and got a quick shower, then dressed quickly, maybe a little too quickly. I almost tripped and ate shit trying to get my pants on in the dark. After successfully getting dressed, I kissed my wife on the forehead and headed out. The location of the latest victim was behind the Romano's building, a very tasty Italian restaurant on the west side of town. I've taken the missus there plenty of times, a favorite of ours actually. Try the meatballs, you won't be disappointed. A half hour it took me to arrive at the scene, making myself hungry, thinking of the delicious cuisine the entire drive. When I pulled up in the back of the restaurant, there was already a crowd gathered. Press and police scanners, surfers, following every detail of this case, were in my way. As I pushed my way through, I screamed at two regular beat cops that were leaned up against the wall, talking to each other, to get a proper cordon up, and pushed a line of onlookers back, out of eyeshot of the victim. "We're trying to work here, you dumb bastards." I then made my way to Charles. He then proceeded to fill me in on the details. Vinnie Lee Stahl, 45-year-old male, was seen a few hours ago dining inside with a woman who is no longer on the premises. The waiter said they both disappeared and no one paid the check for their meal. They both just vanished. Well, I think we now know where he disappeared to. Back here getting his ass killed, I said smart-assedly, as I knelt down to examine the body. The victim's throat had been cut. Deeply, I might add, almost to the point of severed. No other wounds were visible, but I'll find out completely when he's examined by Dr. Andrews later. And of course a cherry stem was found next to the body, on the ground next to his mouth. Speak of the devil. As I stood back up, the coroner's van pulled up, and out walked Dr. Andrews. I told her to keep me updated, then walked into the restaurant. The first to greet me was the owner, George Papa Romano, a large Italian gentleman who looked like he was about to keel over from a heart attack due to the stress. Understandable. A horrific murder such as this would stress out any restaurateur. Definitely not great for business advertisements. I had somebody grab him a glass of water and told him to relax and take a seat. I had a few questions for him. I asked if anything stood out with the couple when he stopped by their table as he made his rounds greeting the guests. If he remembered them at all. He proceeded to tell me, well, yes, the restaurant was very busy. He remembered this couple in particular because the woman was all over the victim, kissing and rubbing. It was making others uncomfortable to be around them. But other than that, nothing seemed strange. No violence whatsoever, not even raising of voices. Asked the waiter the same, and they had the same response. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a loving couple. I asked to review the security footage and was ushered into the back. Our couple in question arrived at the restaurant at approximately 10:30 in the evening, and I could tell it was the same woman from before, just with different hair, shape, and color. I sat and watched them trying to pick up any clues. Everything the owner and waiter said proved to be true. Other than the woman being all over the victim, nothing seemed off. And she was all over him, too. I almost thought she was going to unzip his pants and give him an old-fashioned handy right there at the table. They sat at the table enjoying their meal for about an hour, then got up and headed towards the bathrooms and the back door. I proceeded to lose my shit. At that point, however, when I was informed the cameras in the back and in the alley behind the restaurant were not working, so I was not able to see the murder take place. I was fuming. What else could possibly go wrong right now? Charles then walked into the room and leaned into my ear. He told me Dr. Andrews found something, and it's a bigger surprise than the last victim. Oh, great, I thought. How lovely. The hits just keep on coming. And then made my way back outside, where I saw Dr. Andrews leaned over the victim. She looked up at me with a solemn look on her face and said, "You thought missing testicles were bad. How about the entire organs?" She sarcastically exclaimed as she opened up the flap of skin from the large incision down the victim's sternum, revealing the replaced organs with the cloth-wrapped cult-inscripted new parts. Who is this woman? Do I have to start worrying about a cult now? How much stranger can this case get? The Cherry Stem Killer, Chapter 5, the finale. I told Dr. Andrews to keep me informed of any further findings after her complete examination and autopsy of the body, and to contact me at my office, where I was heading at this moment to try and put all the clues together and solve this fucking strange mystery. I got in my car and made my way back to the office. The rain began to fall heavily, momentarily breaking my thoughts on the case as the heavy drops hit the roof. This woman is not only a brutal killer with understanding of the human anatomy, but she is a master of disguise. I've noticed through reviewing the surveillance footage, and not only does her hair color, length, and shape change, but also the little she allows the camera to see of her face. Certain features seem to change as well. She's clever to know where the cameras are in these establishments and how to avoid a full-on face reveal. She also wears extra accessories to help cover up. But I've noticed when a part of her face does show up on camera, the features are never the same. Nose length or lip size, cheek or jaw shape. I believe she may be using prosthetics. If that's the case, we have a fucking Houdini on our hands, I annoyingly thought as I pulled up to the office. I got out of the car and made my way past a slew of reporters already posted looking for fresh quotes for this morning's cover story in the papers. I want to tell 'em, yeah, I got a quote for you. F off, you pricks. Once inside, I grabbed a cup of coffee to wake my spirits. The brew was rough. It tasted like it had been filtered through an old jockstrap, but it got the job done. I went inside my office and closed the door. I sat the cup of piping jockey brew down on my desk and began to set out every piece of evidence I had from every crime scene pertaining to this case, all over the floor. I stood there staring down across the evidence I had gathered till that point. Every photo, eyewitness report, autopsy finding, and physical clue, and tried to rack my brain on who this woman was. Every victim has had parts missing. The first was missing their arms, the next their legs, the third their torso, the fourth their head. Then the last two, their testicles and organs. The killings are definitely ritualistic and display a cult-like feel. I reached for the phone and called up Dr. Bain. I told him I definitely believed these deaths were cult-related, and if he had any further information on this Il Culto del Resuscitore. He said if it's true, then I had a very determined killer on my hands that will not stop until their task is done, until they've successfully obtained all the parts needed to summon whoever it is they're trying to summon, demon or otherwise, and will not stop until they've achieved that goal. He also said don't necessarily look for a typical large cult, consisting of multiple members. The history of Il Culto del Resuscitore usually is a cult of one, infatuated with resurrecting someone or something that is important to them. He pointed to an example of the new findings that just came out about Neville Burlington and what they discovered in his attic. Evidence pointing to the Prowler murders being ritualistic and signs pointing to him being a member of the cult. I thanked the doctor for the new information and hung up the phone. That's interesting. I'm hearing about this Prowler guy for the second time today. I wonder if my wife knows any more about this. I'll ask her when I get home tonight. As I went back to combing through notes and pictures, I received a call from Dr. Andrews and her findings from her completed autopsy. She said the victim was completely hollowed out, every organ carefully removed and replaced with a cloth-covered and text-written substitute, just like the previous victims. Cause of death was the laceration to the throat. I thanked her and told her I'd call back if I had any other questions. I went back to looking at clues. Hours passed as my eyes became tired and bloodshot. Yet I don't believe I've gotten any closer at discovering who this woman was. As I flipped through still shots of the woman from the security cameras, I received a phone call from my wife. She wanted to check in and see how my day was going. I told her how utterly exhausted I was, which she could tell from my voice. I told her I was reaching my wits' end with this case. I felt I was close and that the woman seemed so familiar, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. I felt exasperated. She asked if I would be home for dinner. I said yes. I was too tired to continue. She said good, and to come home so she could help me relax. I told her that sounded great, and that I had some questions for her about that ancestor of hers she just found out about. She said that seemed interesting. Then we told each other, "I love you," and hung up. I gathered all the evidence and put it back in the box, then turned off the lights in my office and headed to the car. Once again, I was greeted by the throngs of reporters waiting outside for any piece of new information. Before getting inside my car, I informed them there was nothing new to report. But just as I got inside, I heard one of the TV reporters scream out, "Is there any truth to the rumors that the killings are ritualistic and the killer may belong to some kind of cult?" The bright lights of the camera flashed in my face as I told him there's nothing concrete that points to that, but everything is being looked into. I then closed my door and drove off. Son of a bitch, I shouted out as I smacked the steering wheel. We have a effing leak in the department. How else would that reporter bastard know about that? My thoughts went back to the case and the woman, like they always do. I just can't shake the feeling of knowing this woman. Something about the way she moves. It seems so familiar, like I've seen her at one of the countless parties or barbecues we've had. I started thinking about our friends or neighbors, anyone that has been around, but no one stood out to me, at least not yet anyway. Maybe after I've gotten some rest, it will come to me. I finally got home and my beautiful wife greeted me as I opened the door. She helped take off my coat and told me to sit on the couch and relax. She fixed and handed me a drink and said the kids already ate and were in bed, and that she was warming our food and it would be done shortly. I took a drink of the cocktail she made and leaned my head back, finally being able to relax for the first time today. My wife then said, "So what's this about having questions of my ancestor?" she asked as she got up from the couch and walked into the kitchen. "Well, it seems this killer is killing her victims in a ritualistic fashion that align with a certain cult. And I found a doctor who's helping with the case. He specializes in ancient dialect and cults, and he said the findings unearthed at the Burlington Manor that have been in the news all point to Neville Burlington and his Prowler killings being cult-related, and that he was a member of this cult I'm investigating. and I remembered you mentioned him earlier, and if you knew anything more about him, or that since you've been researching him after finding out you're related to him." She said she knew about him being the Prowler and all the evidence that was found pointing to that, but that she didn't hear anything about it being cult-related. I then heard her open and shut the oven and placing the food on the table. I thought it was strange at first that she didn't hear about the cult aspect, since that is what was being widely reported, and she should have come across that in her research. I then noticed, as she walked towards me from the kitchen, holding her drink and doing something with her mouth. My eyes became blurry, and I felt lightheaded. I knew I was tired, but not this tired. I watched as my wife moved closer to me. Then I noticed her hips sway. My heart sank in my chest. I have finally realized why the killer seemed so familiar. It was my wife. As she sat down beside me on the couch, she removed something from her mouth. She smiled and held it in her hand, showing it to me before I passed out. It was a cherry stem. I awoke in the attic, tied to a chair and surrounded by candles. As I shook the grogginess from my eyes, my wife came into view, the glow of the candles illuminating her silhouette. "Look who's up. You've been out for hours. I was afraid I gave you too much at first. I was worried there for a little bit," she said with a slight smile. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted. "Why, goddammit?" She moved at me quickly, pulling a knife from behind her back and placing it against my throat. "Don't wake the children, my dear. I don't want to hurt you. That's not my intention here," she said forcibly. She proceeded to tell me she didn't know why she was doing what she was doing, but she always felt the rage, full beast inside her, trying to get out. She confessed she always contained a murderous rage within herself, and when she discovered who she was now related to, everything finally made sense. Two of the most notorious serial killers of all time now shared her familial tree. It's obviously something in my blood, my family's blood, something that drives us to kill, she exclaimed. That was the only reason she could come up with for her actions. She said once she found everything out, it was like a weight lifted off her shoulders, allowing her to kill. Then when she discovered the occult aspect to her ancestors' Prowler killings, it made her do some deep research into the Il Culto del Resuscitore, and she discovered if she carried out her ritualistic killings correctly, then she could resurrect her long-dead ancestors. I interrupted her story and began to writhe in my chair, trying to free myself from my constraints. "You can't do this!" I shouted. "Murder is wrong. I'm a damn cop. How can you expect me to let this go on?" She walked over to me and straddled my lap, once again placing the knife against my throat. She then leaned closer and kissed me, whispering in my ear, "I don't want to kill you, my love. I love you. I was hoping once you found out and thought things through, you would go along with it, just like Neville's wife, Lady Smith, did when she found out. She not only went along with his killings and accepted what he was doing, she even started helping out. Let us continue in my great-grandparents' footsteps. I don't want to have to kill you. I don't want us to end like this," she said as she stared longingly into my eyes. I could tell she was fighting back a tear as I stared back at her, thinking of my answer, thinking of what to do. Our whole life together flashed before my eyes. We've been together forever. We have a family. Yes, her murdering people is wrong. Yes, it stands against everything I believe in, being a cop. But our love is eternal, and I can't throw everything away over this. I looked into her eyes and told her, I am yours, no matter what. I will help carry out her murderous pursuits, and whatever else she asks of me. I will be your servant of death, my love, I said as I kissed her. Just like your ancestors, our love rings eternal, just as our bloodlust will, as we carry out our reign of terror. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.